There's only one police officer here, so I think they're just going to walk along the footpath by the look of it, due to the numbers. They're allowed to close the road. Right, it's just arrived down at the Defence Department here. And there's a few more cops just turned up right at the last second. They only had the one policeman march them down. Oh, I must have just missed the welcome to country. I'm about 5 minutes late. They never start on time. Today they do.
I want to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and pay respects to their elders past and present. And like Alf said, the catastrophe started here in 1788, and we want to be in solidarity with the First Nations people to liberate this land from the scourge of colonialism. And I warmly acknowledge every First Nations person who's here with us now.
Hello friends and comrades. I'd first like to take a moment to acknowledge that we're meeting on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and to pay my respects to elders past and present. It's on these lands where we've seen unending violence from the state and how it hungers for more. Always was and always will be Aboriginal land.
This is the 3rd of August 2024. It's the Christian lady here as well, but I'm come up for the Hiroshima Nagasaki Never Again rally. I went last year. It was reasonably big. It looks a lot smaller this year, and it must be the Ukrainians over there on the steps as well. So everyone's having a go today. Oh, I must have just missed the welcome to country. I'm about 5 minutes late. They never start on time. Today they do. So there's a reasonably small crowd today.
Thank you, Alfred. And now we call on the Hiroshima Day Committee's chairperson, Riddika Raju, to read a short statement.
Thank you, Sky. Hello, everyone. This is a short statement from the Hiroshima Day Committee. We are here to remember that on August the 6th and August the 9th, 79 years ago, the United States dropped 2 atomic bombs on the Japanese cities of Nagasaki and Hiroshima. Almost 200,000 men, women and children were killed instantly, and many thousands later died of burns and radiation issues. We are here to remember those who died in this horrific event and to remember all victims of nuclear war preparations, including those who lived on the Pacific Islands and our own First Nations people who died during British testing. Since that terrible event, France, Britain, China, Russia, India, Pakistan, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea and Israel have acquired nuclear weapons. We say that no country should ever have nuclear weapons. Civil society has pushed back against nuclear weapons, and an organisation founded in Melbourne, the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, ICANN, reject the AUKUS nuclear-powered submarines and reject the opposition's proposal for nuclear power reactors on 7 sites. Australia is supporting wars and preparing for wars instead of concentrating on solving the social issues in Australia and the region. There are no victors or vanquished in nuclear wars. Today, we solemnly vow to do whatever we can do to make sure that Hiroshima and Nagasaki never happen again.
Thank you, Riddika. Australia's preparation for fighting a nuclear war on behalf of the USA has been through the AUKUS agreement, which calls on us to purchase 8 nuclear-powered submarines for an eye-watering cost of $386 billion, or $30 million a day, for the next 32 years. Our first speaker is Peter Murphy of the Sydney Anti-AUKUS Coalition. Peter Murphy is a convener of the Sydney Anti-AUKUS Coalition and the Sydney Palm Sunday Committee. He is a journalist with decades of activism in the trade union, anti-war, LGBTQI, environment and international solidarity movements. Please welcome Peter.
I want to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and pay respects to their elders past and present. And like Alf said, the catastrophe started here in 1788, and we want to be in solidarity with the First Nations people to liberate this land from the scourge of colonialism. And I warmly acknowledge every First Nations person who's here with us now. I'm from the Sydney Anti-AUKUS Coalition. We focus now today on the devastation of the nuclear attacks on the people of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945 and all the victims of the nuclear industry since then. Let's see how the nuclear-powered submarines that AUKUS is trying to build fits into this picture. The AUKUS Pact between the United States, the United Kingdom and Australia was a super secret project to have Australia acquire nuclear-powered attack submarines, as well as to jointly develop hypersonic missiles, cyber warfare, quantum computing and artificial intelligence weapons. On the evening before Morrison announced this in September 2021, he briefed the Labor opposition leader Anthony Albanese and 3 of his senior shadow ministers. These 4 then held 2 Zoom calls, one for the shadow cabinet and one with the Labor caucus, to formally agree to support AUKUS. Let's be plain, Morrison would have had virtually 0 details to convey in this thing, which was not really a briefing. The Labor Party, the Parliamentary Labor Party, did just collapse its anti-nuclear principles at the drop of a hat. And this just wasn't to clear the decks for the coming election. As it's turned out, the Albanese government is a strident champion of AUKUS. The Australian Parliament has never debated or voted on AUKUS, and this is an absolute insult to our democratic values. The whole plan is aimed at Australia supporting the USA in a war against China, when China is a military threat neither to Australia nor to the United States. Such a war, which they keep suggesting may take place as early as 2027, could easily become a nuclear war with many more Hiroshimas and Nagasakis. Labor's support for AUKUS was endorsed at the 2023 ALP National Conference against considerable opposition. The trade union movement, apart from the Australian Workers' Union, opposes AUKUS. The communities where the proposed nuclear-powered submarines would be based, Port Kembla or Newcastle or Sydney and Fremantle, they oppose AUKUS. The First Nations and rural communities where the high-level and low-level nuclear waste would be dumped, they're opposed. Australia's Pacific and Asian neighbours are opposed. AUKUS is also demonising Chinese Australians. There's almost 1 million of these Chinese Australian citizens. The public are not convinced that the massive cost is justified. The proposed nuclear-powered submarines would use uranium U-235 enriched to 92%. That's the same as a nuclear weapon grade. This is a breach of the Treaty of Rarotonga and the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. That Treaty of Rarotonga was signed by Australia in 1985 under the Hawke government. It was designed to make the Pacific a nuclear weapons-free zone. But AUKUS is bringing in weapons-grade uranium and an arms race with nuclear weapons. All the Pacific Island states were affronted when they heard about all this on the news. The 10-member Association of Southeast Asian Nations was not consulted either. The Labor government claims that ASEAN is so-called central to its regional policy, but the AUKUS Pact is 3 non-ASEAN white powers overruling ASEAN. Australia has now committed to invest $4.45 billion into expanding the 2 US nuclear submarine construction yards and another $4.6 billion into the only UK nuclear submarine construction yard. And then Australia will be paying for the submarines built in them. As former Prime Minister Keating quickly declared, this is the worst deal in history. some of these billions of Australian taxpayers' dollars are actually being invested in the construction of the new US Columbia-class strategic nuclear submarines, which carry nuclear missiles. This is a blatant breach of Australia's commitment to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Under Obama, way back then, the US began framing China as the enemy. That was 2015, and Australia's Turnbull government started using this language in 2016. In 2015, the US Army commissioned the RAND Corporation to study the potential outcome of a war between the US and China. The report was titled, War with China, Thinking Through the Unthinkable. We have to make them stop thinking about it. Apart from the military cost, which would be huge, it concluded that the significant economic, domestic, political and international effects would hit China much harder than the US. But it would harm the US and its global primacy. Still, the report concluded that the United States should make prudent preparation to be able to wage a long and intense war with China. By the way, such a war would also collapse the Australian economy by blocking all of the exports from Australia to China, Taiwan, Korea and Japan. The US plan specifically includes the support of highly capable and reliable local allies such as South Korea, Japan, Australia and the Philippines. Australia's official defence strategic update does not assert that China may attack Australia. Its main message is about the tension between the US and China driving the strategic dynamics in the region. They use this crappy language. And that Australia, though the decision is that Australia will join the US in a high-tech, high-intensity war against China if that's what happens. So Australia has really returned to the so-called forward defence mumbo-jumbo that took us into the Korean, Vietnam, Afghan and Iraq wars in support of US aggression. AUKUS is really this policy writ large. So what should we do now? We must continue to demand that the Albanese Labor government sign and ratify that treaty, the United Nations Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which it promised to do from 2018 right through to now, and it hasn't done. We must make it clear to a government that's not listening to us that AUKUS must be cancelled. We have to engage more and more of the public in our campaign against AUKUS, and at the next federal election, I urge people, organisations, to vote for candidates who agree with us, ahead of Labor and ahead of the coalition who are even crazier. The Australian government must loudly campaign in the region for no war against China and for the demilitarisation of the South China Sea. Hiroshima never again. Nagasaki never again. Maralinga never again.
Thank you, Peter. Anti-war activities happen all year round. Why not get involved and committed to peace? There are peace groups all around Sydney needing new members. We wish to point out that the Hiroshima Committee has been going for at least 60 years, and to mark that fact, we have put on an exhibition at Trades Hall. The exhibition shows the work of the committee over the last 60 years. It's open during business hours at the atrium of Trades Hall. Take the time to view the nuclear issues that have rocked Australia. Uranium mining, US bases, Palestine, Iraq, and many more. With submarines and the proposed nuclear reactors of Peter Dutton, Australia could soon be producing high levels of nuclear waste, which will remain radioactive for thousands of years. Sylvia Hale, a well-known anti-nuclear and Greens campaigner, will speak of the prospect of storage of nuclear waste. Sylvia is a former Greens member of the New South Wales Parliament. She is co-convenor of the Greens Peace and Anti-AUKUS campaign. Please welcome Sylvia.
Thank you. I've been asked today to speak about waste, nuclear waste. Can I say, I am not going to talk about the technicalities, I'm going to talk about the politics of the issue. Because there is no country on earth that has worked out how to store high-level nuclear waste permanently. And we need to store it for millennia, not just for decades. We need to store it in a way that's safe from earthquake, safe from accident, safe from military attack or bombing. Because once it's breached, those waste facilities are breached, that's when we have an absolute disaster. Now, one of the problems we have, and tell me, it's not just Australia that's facing this problem. The United States has high-level nuclear waste from its reactors that it's got stored in various centres in a number of states, but it's only temporary storage. The United Kingdom, which of course has had nuclear-powered submarines for many years, it solved the problem by having its ships its submarines that have been decommissioned. It stores them, has them tied up at docks, 2 locations in the United Kingdom. And then one of those 15, there's 17, there's 7 ships, nuclear decommissioned submarines that are stored at Rosyth and 14 at Devonport. One of those submarines is the Her Majesty's submarine Dreadnought. It's been stored waiting for its nuclear reactor to be decommissioned. It's been in storage for longer than it was ever in service. So and you might say, well, 60 years ago, when it seemed that nuclear submarines were all the go, you might have loaded the submarine up with concrete and sent it out and sunk it in the middle of the ocean. But that's no longer a feasible or acceptable solution. Now, Australia, true to its sort of settler colonial background, out here not only to dispossess the native peoples of this country, but also to make the land safe for British and other European settlers. What we did, what we do, what we have a history of doing, is saying if the UK or the US say jump, we jump twice as high as is required. And in terms of nuclear weapons, look at Woomera, look at Maralinga, the long-term impacts upon the Indigenous people of that area that has resulted from those tests that were of no benefit to Australia and of dubious benefit to the United Kingdom. But what we see with AUKUS is this same preparedness to do whatever our superiors, our masters require. And how we do it is we elect a Labor government which ostensibly is opposed to nuclear weapons and nuclear proliferation. It even signed a treaty opposing the proliferation of nuclear weapons about 20 years ago. But what it does is it says, you, the US and the UK want us to help them out. They've got submarines, nuclear-powered submarines, whose reactors need to be decommissioned and the high-level nuclear waste needs to be stored somewhere permanently. So, what does our government do? What does Defence Minister Richard Marles do? He puts a bill to the Parliament, the Australian Naval Nuclear Safety Bill. It's currently before the Parliament, and the provisions of that bill say that the Minister of Defence can determine anywhere it wishes to locate a waste storage area for nuclear waste from these nuclear-powered submarines. What they say doesn't matter if there's any other Commonwealth government legislation, any state government legislation, any local council legislation that would prohibit the location of a waste disposal facility, a nuclear waste disposal facility. It can override that. It is totally at the whim of the Minister for Defence to say X will be the site of a nuclear waste facility. And the controls for it, the protections in case there is an accident, that is entirely going to be determined by the Minister. But it's a bit hypocritical for slow and short, actually is the best one. It's hypocritical for the Labor government to sort of be attacking Peter Dutton because he wants nuclear facilities on land, but we have the Liberals want nuclear facilities on land, but we just want to put them in submarines and then have those submarines located at ports around the Australian seaboard. So they will in fact become waste disposal areas. And while the government has sort of seems to have put this naval security safety bill on the back burner, what it has done is actually say, well, we'll use the Australian Radiation and Protection Authority, PANZA, and we'll get them to do our dirty work. So what PANZA did was to put in it was the submarine agency, the Australian Submarine Agency, put in an application to have what they called was a controlled industrial facility. But actually, it's a nuclear waste processing facility. And they put it out and they told people, we will consult widely. But they didn't consult. What they did was to put the proposal out for public submissions. And it was to be located over in Western Australia at the naval base there, the Australian naval base there at Stirling. So they put it out. They got 165 submissions, primarily not only from the Indigenous people, but the people in Fremantle and surrounding areas opposing it. But the trouble is, PANZA really didn't want anyone to be conscious of how much opposition there was to it, and so they refused to make those submissions public. They've held them in secret. So they conducted their consultation, assured everybody that it would be perfectly fine, no chance of a nuclear accident. And so what they've done is, about 3 weeks ago, they approved it. They approved it. And this is the thin edge of the wedge. This is where, it should be the thin end of the wedge, but never mind. This is where Australia will in fact service nuclear submarines from both the United Kingdom, the United States, and if Australia gets its own AUKUS submarines out. And servicing them means that they've got to take the nuclear rods out of the fuel rods out, and then they've got to somehow treat them, and then they've got to find somewhere safe to store them. And no one knows how to do this yet, right? France reprocesses some of these rods, but everything they've reprocessed they send back to whoever owns that waste, and they say, right, you're responsible for the long-term storage. It is utterly, totally irresponsible for us to consider going ahead with the AUKUS agreement. We should, here in New South Wales, the most likely location is in Port Kembla, and I think it is our absolute duty, not only to ourselves, our children, but to future generations, that we do everything we can to prevent that naval nuclear base, whether it's in Newcastle, Port Kembla, or even in Sydney, from proceeding. This is the major task of our time, the major responsibility that rests with all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Sylvia. If we are to maintain the sort of pressure that we need to convince our politicians that they have taken the wrong path, we will need some financial help. We have a collection bucket ready, and members of the Hiroshima Day Committee ready to go under the wise supervision of Frank. Please give generously. Now I'd like to invite Dr. Mark Diesendorf to speak. He was trained as a physicist and was a pioneer of wind power in Australia. He now researches and campaigns on the energy and sustainability transition. His latest book is The Path to a Sustainable Civilization.
Thank you very much. I was asked to talk about nuclear power, but first I would like to say something about the American nuclear bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945. With the benefit of hindsight, that bombing was probably unnecessary from a military point of view. By the beginning of August 1945, the United States Air Force had almost complete control of the airspace over Hiroshima and Nagasaki, over the whole of Japan. And that's demonstrated by the fact that the B-29 bomber that dropped the atomic bombs on those two cities was not escorted by military aircraft at all. It was perfectly safe. It could fly over Japan without being worried about being attacked. So Japan was in fact, in early August, totally surrounded by the US military. Nothing could go in or out, essentially. It would have had to surrender eventually as it ran out of food and fuel and other supplies. So why did the Americans drop the bombs? Well, after they dropped the bombs on Hiroshima, which had some military significance, on the 8th of August, 2 days after the initial bombing, the Soviet Union declared war on Japan and invaded Manchuria, which was controlled by the Japanese on the East Asian mainland. And the Soviet Union invaded Manchuria with overwhelming force. And we now know from historical analysis that that was the main reason that drove the military establishment in Japan and ultimately the emperor to decide to surrender. They were aware of the atomic bombing of Hiroshima, but it hadn't really registered very much because the Americans had been bombing 60, 70 cities of Japan, sometimes with firebombing, and the significance of the atomic bombing didn't really strike home to the military establishment in Japan. So why then did the Americans bomb Nagasaki, which was not a military target of any significance, on the 9th of August. They bombed it partly, as we now know, to send a message to the Soviet Union that after the war it would be the Americans who would be in control of Japan, and that the Soviet Union would better keep its distance and better keep out. That seems to have been the main reason. So the US nuked Japan in order to get a rapid surrender before the Soviets could actually invade the country of Japan itself. Now, the nuclear explosives used on Japan, in Hiroshima they used highly enriched uranium, and as Peter said, the same kind of highly enriched uranium that nuclear submarines use, the American nuclear submarines. And just to be sure that they could that they could use nuclear weapons with two different explosives, Nagasaki was bombed with plutonium, which comes from the spent fuel of nuclear reactors. Now, since that period, we have so-called peaceful nuclear power, or I would call civil nuclear power, and that industry is capable of producing nuclear weapons, nuclear explosives, by both methods. If you have uranium enrichment, you can enrich the uranium further to make nuclear bombs. The more you enrich it, the smaller the bomb, easier to deliver. With plutonium, that too is very effective. Now, you heard a number of countries that have developed nuclear weapons, but what I'd like to add to that is that quite a number of countries that develop nuclear weapons use the nuclear power fuel cycle. The British government, with its first generation of nuclear power stations, reprocessed the spent fuel to extract the plutonium and used that so-called peaceful nuclear fuel to supplement the fuel obtained from military reactors. In France, the civil and nuclear weapons programs are indistinguishable. They use the same facilities. India used nuclear technology, nuclear power technology from Canada to develop its nuclear weapons. Pakistan had a very enterprising nuclear physicist who worked on nuclear power at the Urenco plant in Europe, which is meant to be a civil part. He came back and used his knowledge to develop Pakistan's nuclear weapons. And because he was an entrepreneur, he then assisted North Korea to develop its nuclear weapons. South Africa developed nuclear weapons based on their nuclear power station. By the way, South Africa is the only nuclear weapons country that actually terminated, after it successfully making nuclear weapons, it terminated its program and dismantled it. None of the others, of course, have done that. So nuclear power can be a cloak and a resource for developing nuclear weapons, and in fact a number of countries attempted to do that but fortunately discontinued their programs. Algeria, Argentina, Australia in the 1960s, where they started to build a nuclear power station at Jervis Bay, but fortunately they only got as far as the foundations, and a change of Prime Minister terminated that program. And you can read all about it in Richard Bronowski's book, Fact or Fiction. Argentina, Australia, Brazil, Libya, South Korea and Taiwan. These are all countries that use the so-called peaceful nuclear cycle to try and develop nuclear weapons, and mostly discontinued for political reasons. Now, you've heard from Sylvia about nuclear waste, which is another serious problem. I'd like to add to that the risk of nuclear accidents. there have been many, many nuclear accidents, but the most serious were the accident in the former Soviet Union at Kishtim in 1957, the partial meltdown in the United States at 3 Mile Island in 1979, which could have led to a huge disaster. They almost got there, not quite. And of course, Chernobyl in Ukraine in 1986 and Fukushima Daiichi in Japan in 2011. What many people do not know, and what the media doesn't tell you, was that when the tsunami struck the Fukushima nuclear power station and leading to the meltdown of 3 of its 6 reactors, further down the coast at a place called Kamizu, Japan had a small wind farm in the surf. The tsunami went straight through the wind farm, and the wind farm continued to generate for some time afterwards until the grid went down, and when the grid was repaired, the wind farm continued to generate. I think that gives you an idea of the difference between the threats of the 2 different technologies, nuclear and renewables. Nuclear power is a very unforgiving technology. Now, we're told by the coalition that they plan to build nuclear reactors in New South Wales, Victoria, South Australia and so on. South Australia will reach 100% renewable electricity in 2 or 3 years. I mean, where is the room for nuclear power? Now, it's true that the electricity demand will grow as we electrify transport and electrify combustion heating, but they really, in South Australia, they don't have to work very hard to maintain 100% renewable electricity, which ultimately will become 100% renewable all energy. New South Wales and Victoria are quite well advanced with renewables, although they're not going as fast as they should. They too will be at 100% renewables, wind and solar, long before any nuclear reactor, any nuclear power station could be built in New South Wales and Victoria. So the only way the coalition can get their nuclear power stations built is if they basically force the closure of renewable energy projects, and they restrict the ability of households to feed sunshine off their roof in the form of solar electricity into the grid. The safest and least expensive energy pathway for Australia is to reject nuclear power, to accelerate progress towards 100% renewable energy. And by the way, don't believe the nonsense you're told about 100% renewable energy allegedly not being possible. Scotland already generates 113% of its electricity consumption from renewables, mostly wind supplemented by hydro. It actually generates more than it uses in Scotland, and the difference is exported. South Australia and Denmark are already at 70% renewables, and they will hit 100% in terms of electricity generation before 2030. So we have to accelerate our progress in renewable energy, cancel AUKUS, of course, and cancel the forced posture agreement, which is also a very nasty one that doesn't get much publicity, that allows the visits of nuclear submarines from the US and potentially nuclear-armed B-52s. If you need a simple single sentence to say to people who somehow have been convinced by the pro-nuclear power propaganda, it is very easy. Nuclear power stations are too dangerous because of proliferation, nuclear wastes and nuclear accidents. They're too dangerous, they're too expensive, they're too slow to build, and they're too inflexible in operation to be good partners for wind and solars. There's no way that we need a nuclear power industry in Australia.
Thank you, Mark. Now, just before the march, I'd like to remind everyone about the exhibition at Trades Hall, the singing event at the Gaelic Club, and remember to be out there for peace. Please move behind the banner.
Okay, well that was pretty short. You got another lot here who are a bit. Who are these people? Kangaroos need protection. Our mothers stop the slaughter of kangaroos. So you got that one, and then look over here we've got the Ukrainians, and it's quite a good. They've got quite a good crowd. I think they're here every week. I don't come up. I came up once or twice, but oh no, what's this? Sorry, Venezuelans. I do apologise to the Ukrainians and the Venezuelans. There we go. Oh, so this must be just a one-off sort of thing. Yeah, they just kind of stand there and then they have a bit of a shout every now and again. I don't know that there's any speeches or anything else, but they got a good turnout. So that's just after the latest election results, I'm assuming. All right, we'll just follow the march. What they did last year was they march a little way along the street, and then they go and stop at the Defence Department in Pitt Street. So it's not a very long march. And then last time they had some more speeches there. A young boy spoke and some other people. So yeah, but it's certainly not the same size of crowd anyway.
Never again. Never again. Never again. Never again. Never again. Never again.
Nagasaki! Nuclear weapons out now!
Out now.
Nuclear weapons out now! 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 Nuclear weapons out now!
There's only one police officer here, so I think they're just going to walk along the footpath by the look of it, due to the numbers. They're not allowed to close the road.
Ban nuclear weapons! Albanese signed the treaty! Ban nuclear weapons! Ban nuclear weapons! Hiroshima, never again! Nagasaki, never again! Hiroshima! Never again! Nagasaki! Never again! Hiroshima! Nagasaki! Never again! Hiroshima! Never again! Nuclear weapons! Out now! Hiroshima! Never again! Nagasaki! Never again! Hiroshima! Never again! Nagasaki! Never again! Hiroshima! Never again! Nagasaki!
It's just arrived down at the Defence Department here, and there's a few more cops just turned up right at the last second. They only had the one policeman march them down.
Nagasaki! Hiroshima! Nagasaki!
I don't think there's anything much inside that says really say it's the Defence Department, but
Albanese signed the treaty! Ban nuclear weapons! 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 Nuclear weapons out now! 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 Thank you, everyone.
For our final speaker, I'd like to call up Naruaki Cann. Naruaki is a CFMEU member, community activist, and was born in Hiroshima.
Hello, friends and comrades. I'd first like to take a moment to acknowledge that we're meeting on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and to pay my respects to elders past and present. It's on these lands where we've seen unending violence from the state and how it hungers for more. Always was and always will be Aboriginal land. I stand before you as a Japanese man and an Australian worker. I'm also proudly a rank and file member of the CFMEU. Today I think back to when my eyes were open to the atrocity committed against my home. Having been born there, I've returned to Hiroshima with my family many times, and as a child on one trip, my parents took us to the Hiroshima Peace Memorial Museum. Inside were dozens and dozens of images of the aftermath, and burned into my mind are the depictions of burnt skin draping off the victims. Over 200,000 innocent, everyday people lived in Hiroshima at the time, and not many of them would survive. It didn't make sense to me then. How could such a devastating power be used against us? How had we reached this point where humans would willingly destroy hundreds of thousands of other lives? It was done as a show of force, a display of how depraved the United States had become, and a warning to all those who opposed them. Really not a whole lot more than a live test for the warmongers. The everyday people of Hiroshima and Nagasaki were maimed and slaughtered as a step in the geopolitical games of the ruling class. That's the real toll of war, the lives of the people, quantified and qualified as a resource to be used against one another. The bombing of my home changed the world. Countries all over the world would seek to emulate the US's power out of fear. Nuclear destruction was the way forward for powerful countries to impose their will on others. And from then on, workers of the world would fear that their lives could be instantly reduced to ash and fallout. Since then, the estimated amount of nuclear warheads in the world has reached over 12,500. The geniuses in our war rooms believe that the best way to have peace is to continue building these weapons with the threat of mutually assured destruction. And what kind of term is that to be thrown around? That if there are weapons like this in our world, then another country, if not the whole world, ought to burn for them to exist. Most of these bombs are in the hands of the ruling class today, and there are roughly 1,000 kiloton bombs, over 66 times the power of the one that devastated my home. What caused unfathomable destruction at the time is a small fraction of the power of just one of its modern counterparts. If where I stand right now was struck by one of these bombs today, all the way from Wynyard to Central would be gone, vaporised. Widespread death from there all across metropolitan Sydney. People would suffer third-degree burns as far as Manly, Homebush, Rockdale, Port Botany and North Ryde. Windows in Parramatta, Caringbah and Narrabeen would be shattered from the blast. And our government, in its usual display of lacking a spine, still wants to throw money down the drain to appease America with the AUKUS deal. But the implication of it in our lives are far more drastic than that statement lets on. You've heard this number plenty of times today, but $368 billion of our budget taken away from us, our taxpayer money, and it's being taken away from when we need it the most. COVID highlighted the inadequacies of our vital infrastructure, particularly the healthcare system. While our lives are being signed away by the government, working Australians' buying power is going down the drain in this cost of living crisis. But we've seen the budget and the economy mismanaged time and time again, no matter what major party is in charge. It's no phenomenon. This is what capitalism does, and what its worshippers want for us as workers and everyday people. We've been made to feel scared of foreign powers, comrades, to justify this total waste of our taxes to serve their interests. But we feel the boot of our state pushing down at our throats more and more every day. Our concerns as workers and everyday people are being misdirected, while our unions, my union right now, is under attack from a Labor government. Our untapped power as a people is what truly scares the state, and they punish us with their budgets, deals and laws for our very existence. For what Australians and all other workers in Australia do to keep this country prosperous, this country, our industry, our money is ours. We built it and we maintain it. We should have a greater say in what's done with it. As a young Australian and a worker, I fear for Australia's future. If not ravaged by our worsening climate, ignored by the politicians, then my own government wishes for us to die as the United States attack dog in wars that we have no interest in. We must find our strength together, comrades, and demand more. We must demand global nuclear disarmament, an end to war, our resources allocated to serve our class and all oppressed peoples, because I yearn to live a fulfilling working life, free from the fear of nuclear power in our country, free from hardship that can be solved with a properly managed economy. And I want to experience the slogan of Hiroshima Day, the realisation of everlasting peace. I and all other young Australians should be guaranteed the right to a peaceful future, and that is a nuclear-free future. With all I've said, how can we uphold something that stands in the way of that future? How can we sit by idly as these corruptions of our collective human innovation are in the hands of those who exploit us every day? Today we mourn the victims for the 79th year. Tomorrow and every day after, we fight back and wield our democracy as it ought to be, in our hands and expressed every day. Make sure your friends, your family, your job site, your union, your council, your government knows that we demand better. We must demand peace, no to nuclear proliferation, no to war, and Maralinga, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, never again.
And thank you everyone for coming out today. Don't forget our exhibition, the Palestine marches, and to work for peace and against war. Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Thank you.